Hey, how are you today? Thanks a lot for joining us. My guest today is a repeat offender, actually, from my old podcast. His name is Alan Newman. I've known Alan, gosh, since 1983, I think. We
You're
went to
close.
we went to a New Age seminar together, and he and I and
A
another fellow
cult. A
named Bill.
cult. Call it what it is. It's a cult.
It was a cult,
Yeah.
and we've had three people get together, myself and Alan, a guy named Bill Schubar, and we started a group called the Mountain Group. And the Mountain Group was a peer-to-peer of business owners, and we managed to stay together for about 27 years. And we finally figured out that, you know, I think we're done telling that how to do better stuff, but we could actually get back together again. But at any rate, let's bring Alan on and we'll start the conversation. Hey, Alan, how are you today?
Just I woke up, my feet hit the ground, and I'm still breathing.
And you didn't
It's
fall
all
over.
good.
You didn't fall over. So all is good.
Not today. Not today. It's a
So
sore topic.
yeah, yeah. Well, I can appreciate that. Falls are no fun. At any rate, let's talk about retirement and reinvention. Um, when you think about retirement, I mean, you've been in business for a gazillion years. You've had more businesses than almost anybody I know, and you sort of recently stopped, or it appears you stopped. So, what does reinvention mean in retirement for you?
Well, Josh, I when I look back at my life, which I only do now, never did it earlier. I reinvented myself how many times? Um, I had a career in rural medicine. I had a career in yacht timeshares, in the Caribbean back in the 70s. I was in direct mail. I was in manufacturing. Each one of these was a reinvention that I had to learn what was different about this and how do I apply what limited skills I had to the current process. And I always wondered, I went to 5 schools in 5 years in my academic career. And I always wonder whether that experience really created the personality of reinvention. Because every time I went to a new school, it was a new experience. I had to meet new friends. I had to develop a sense of camaraderie with the group. And I guess I became more comfortable than most with reinvention. This one was the hardest. Um,
So, what made this the hardest?
there was a thread that led through all the other ones about building community. Whether I always saw businesses, I was building communities. And if the community had a similar psychographic profile and uh, there was a group of them who would follow whatever I was curious about. And that was easy for me. I had to learn new skills from direct response to mail order to this, to that. But, those were easier than going from constantly busy, always looking forward, to slowing down, being willing to accept that age brings on some fairly significant body and mind changes that I didn't know that I was old until I was 72. Up
Yep.
until 72, I never dawned on that I was old. I would look in the mirror and go, who's that old fart? But beside from that, I just learned, don't look in the fucking mirror. Right? So,
Yeah, you can say whatever you want. I don't care.
yeah, yeah.
Um, so,
Um,
so, what, what changed at 72?
I was, I started to feel my age. I started to notice that I was not as excited to get up in the morning and take on the challenges that I knew were in the past. That's what I thrived on. Um, my, I also started to experience brain fog. All of a sudden, there were times I spent my life reading legal documents. You know, uh, it's what, if you're going to be an entrepreneur and you have to be you have to be able to deal with lawyers and legalities. And I got to the point where it was tough. I could not read a legal document. Um, and there are times in the day where um, my brain just didn't function. I used to be able to follow 6, 7 projects going on at any given time. I knew where we are against our goals in those projects. I knew where we were against our budget. This is effortlessly. They were my projects and they were like children and I knew who they were. And then I had all I could do to follow one project. um, and even then it was a struggle. And so it's starting around 92. I'm sorry, around 72. And that's really when the topic started to come up. I had a good friend who you knew well, who was also experiencing the same kind of problems. And we were both starting to struggle with, we were so used to creating something in our minds and then executing it. And all of a sudden we were both finding that the mind was still happy to create, but the execution was getting tougher and tougher. And that was the sign. And then it just continued to get more difficult.
Same thing happened with me at 71, 72. I was, saying I was going to do this business, get consulting clients, get this sort of stuff. And I knew what I had to do, but I just didn't do it. I mean, I did all the planning,
Yeah.
did all the stuff. But when it came time to actually do something, I just didn't, it took me 4 years to figure out it's time to move on.
Yeah. It was, I stayed active until about 75. And at around 75, I realized, for reasons that I think you're aware that I really don't want to talk about at the moment because it's not my story to tell. I realized that I couldn't do this anymore. And I had a stepfather, Julie's stepfather, and I were good friends. He was an entrepreneur. We shared a lot of commonalities. And in his last 5 years, I watched him struggle with getting older, dealing with the physical and mental issues that age brings. And he fought it the whole way. He made himself miserable and he made everyone around him just as miserable as he was. And I watched, I said, I don't want to do that. So I'm actually kind of proud of myself.
Yeah. So what do you want? So what do you want to do?
I want to be comfortable aging and still find ways to use my brain, use my creative drive, and recognize that I just have to learn to find other ways to fill time because I can't do that all the time. So I've taken up travel more motorcycle riding, more reading. And I'm relatively, it took me 2 to 3 years, by the way, to get from, but I think, at age 78, 79, I'm kind of comfortable. I've kind of accepted this is the way it is. I have found some things that I can still do. As you know, I am active in a local business, and I was really struggling to really do the management portion. And so we just brought in somebody to really take over the management, and somebody who I worked with for 40 years. And so she and I have a very good relationship and we think exactly the same. And as you know, I'm working on a podcast with, similar but different goals than what you're doing. And I'm finding that I can still do things as long as I don't have to execute. As long as I don't have to be, that's wrong. I can still execute, but I can't be responsible for the business any longer.
Yeah.
I can comment, I can weigh in, but I can't take the responsibility to make sure that all things are being done the way I want them to do, which is really, in my opinion, what entrepreneurs have to do.
So it sounds to me like you have had an interesting experience with transition, especially
Yes,
this
ma'am.
one, especially this one, because it's taken a long time. And Bill Bridges calls this the messy middle. My friend Susan Bradley calls this passage. But it's the time, and I was in the same place for 3 or 4 years, but most of the time I didn't realize I was there. And I think that's true for many of us, is that if we can actually name where we are in a transition, it makes it go easier and smoother. At least that's my theory.
Well, you
And,
always have,
and as you know,
and
I
I
never
love
have
it.
theories.
Yeah, and as you know, I frequently disagree with your theories.
Yes, I know that.
So, you know, in some ways, the most difficult transition I had was leaving seventh generation. Um, I had built a community of owners of businesses who were trying to change the world through business. And because seventh generation was one of the businesses that really, I think, demonstrated how we wanted to try to change the world, becoming more environmentally conscious. Um, I could pretty much get to almost anybody who I cared about in either a direct phone call or one introductory phone call. And when I left seventh generation, nobody answered my calls. And to me, that was shocking. Um,
That's a very
you know, the,
difficult thing, and it happens to almost everybody.
yeah, that was when it happened to me.
Yeah.
In the other transitions, I didn't have the level of visibility. I didn't have the kind of community that I had when I did with seventh generation. And so the fall off was much greater. And that's when I learned, don't read your press reports. You know, seriously, we all put our pants on one leg at a time. And that's when I realized that I'm not special. That I'm just a guy doing what he's trying to do. And it really made me look at the world differently when I did Magic Hat, which, was a very successful craft brewery, certainly on the East Coast and through a lot of the other country. And I never, ever took that for granted. And I never felt that I was special. I thought I was just a schmo who figured out to apply business 101 to a category that was filled with people who really didn't understand that. They were mostly engineers and beer lovers. I was neither. And I was just some guy trying to figure out how to apply business beer practices to a craft brewery.
So let's take a step back to seventh generation. How long did it take you to reach equilibrium after you left seventh generation?
2 years.
2 years?
Yeah, it took the start of planning for Magic Hat.
Okay.
Once I had a new project,
Yeah.
and I'm starting the planning, and I've got something. And we mentioned this briefly earlier before we went online. In my lifetime, I don't ever remember looking back. I always was looking forward. And when seventh generation ended, there was not a lot to look forward. I was licking my wounds. I was learning that I was a different person to the world than I had been. And once I had something to look forward to again, building the beer business, all of a sudden the back disappeared once again. And I'm now focused on how do I do this in a way that will give me satisfaction and will create something in a way different than what came before me.
So let's fast forward to when you were 72. Were you looking forward with that transition?
Yeah. Um, I knew I had a 5-year contract with Boston Beer.
Yeah.
I knew that was coming to an end. I had a bunch of consulting gigs, people who were contacting me to do consulting gigs. So the transition after Boston Beer, the reality is my last year at Boston Beer was very challenging for me. And because it was challenging for me, it was also challenging to them. So when the day came that the contract was over, it was a relief, not a problem. Um, Both Seventh Generation and Magic Hat didn't end that way. I was not prepared for the ending. I was prepared for the ending of the 5-year deal with Boston Beer, and I had people who wanted me to do projects that I found interesting. So I just rolled right along, and then I rolled right into Ars Riot in the pandemic, and that's really when I hit the wall.
Yeah.
Both age-wise, yes, there were a lot of contributing factors to the failure of my history at Arts Riot. But had I been 65 and not 72, I probably I'm arrogant. I mean, everybody's greatest strength is also greatest weakness is also their greatest strength. Mine is clearly arrogance. I'm arrogant enough to think I can pull this thing off. When I got a call from Boston Beer saying, "Hey, you want to start 5 businesses in 5 years?" Didn't ever dawn on me to question. Well, why would I ever question? I said, sure, let's do that. So really, it was a change. The change was age related. Right around the time I was I was probably 75 then. And I still believe arrogantly that I could have, even though the pandemic was problematic, even though I had a financial partner who was creating major problems, even though permitting was dragging because of pandemic and all sorts of issues, I'm arrogant enough to believe if I wasn't that old, I would have pulled it off, because that's what businesses are really about. It's how do you make shit work, regardless. And I didn't have it. And that's again when a good friend of ours died, and I realized that it's time for me to settle down. And then it took me 2 years to kind of accept that, I did 2 business plans. I'm still struggling to be who I was, realizing that I can't.
So
Did that answer your question?
yeah, it does. And this is where reinvention sort of comes in, is that
Yeah.
folks who successfully transit through retirement, or retirement might be 75 and not 65 these days, but it does come. And it seems to me that reinvention is a big part of that. And, with you doing the podcast, especially on the topics that you're talking about, that's sort of reinvention to me. For me, it was, I was just kind of floating through nowhere. I knew what I was supposed to do. I just didn't do it. And then
I didn't want to.
yeah, then we went out to lunch. And by the way, Alan is responsible for the long strange trip. He was talking about a project he was thinking about. And I said, my God, that fits in perfectly with where I've been wanting to go. So no, I did not steal. I'm not trying to push it. I'm not trying to go into competition with Alan, because we see the world from a really different viewpoint.
Bring it on. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
I never saw competition.
Yeah, I never saw
Do you know mine, by the way? Can I
No.
plug mine?
Yeah, go ahead.
Too busy to die.
Okay, that's a good one. I like that.
Me too. I wanted to call it happy endings, but that didn't work.
Well, that's maybe there's I was surprised in the long strange trip that it actually wasn't that I could use it, because it wasn't copyrighted or
No, but it's a different you're in a different category.
Yeah.
And when I saw you do that, I went, that's a perfect name for Josh's podcast.
Yes, it is. In my
And we all
site,
know why.
in my Substack and all that sort of stuff. So you mentioned before we started going live that you, instead of looking forward, have been looking back. What's that about?
Um, you know, when it started, I would get annoyed with myself. Um, what am I looking back to? It was a foreign experience,
Yeah.
and it made me feel old. Because that's what old people do, is they tell the same stories over and over again.
Yeah.
And I have a long list in the N word, the never category. One of my N words was, I'm never going to sit around talking about my ailments, and I'm never going to sit around telling the same story over and over again. But there are not a lot of new stories to tell. And I find myself doing that. So it took a while for me to get to kind of enjoy thinking back at what I had done. Because I had a ball. I mean, let's be really clear. I never thought about retirement because I loved what I did.
Hmm.
And my advice to people, and I just gave it to somebody this morning, who's in it deep right now, I said, enjoy the hell out of this.
Yes.
Because one day you won't be able to do this. And I don't feel like I enjoyed it enough when I did it, because the truth is I loved doing it. There's not a single thing that I did that I didn't truly enjoy myself and found myself entertained. And so I had to get beyond the N word to appreciate what it was. And that was a bit of a struggle, but I'm now very comfortable. Not as telling the same story over and over again, but in thinking back, some of the things that I enjoyed doing, and the relationships that I had. I had some great relationships, and I created some interesting opportunities for people, and I started to appreciate those kinds of things in a way that I never did when I was actually doing them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, because when you're doing it, you're too busy to sit there and examine. And 30-year-olds, 40-year-olds, as a rule, are not especially introspective.
No. I know I was not. I was just trying to figure it out,
Yeah.
and it took 100% of my attention to figure it out. And so thinking back was, who had time for that?
I certainly didn't. And, as we talked beforehand, my children paid the price for that. And I think that that's not unusual with first generation business owners. I think the second generation may be doing different. And the thing that I'm curious about, I need to find some woman first generation owners that come on the show and see if men do business differently than women.
Oh, really?
Yeah, well, I don't know the answer to that. I've had people say yes, and I've had people say no. They do it exactly the same way. I think there's,
I don't think so.
I don't think so either, but I think there's a mix that are in there. There are women. I mean, we know some. When we go back to the mountain group, there were some people in the mountain group that the women were really hard asses. They were way more hard ass than we were. Um,
The reality is, and this is something that I learned and worked hard at Magic Net. All male, all female, they both suck.
yeah,
You really have to have a mix, and that's
you
where strength.
absolutely. Yeah, we're not really doing an investigation into diversity, but my God, companies that are diverse way outperform companies that aren't. It's that simple.
But yeah, I agree with you 100%.
It's When we started adding women to our management team, our business got very different very fast.
I've always had a balance of male female in the management.
Yeah.
I may have been a little bit over on the female side to balance the testosterone a little bit. What this the thing, you know, I spent 17 or 22 years or some amount of time in the beer industry. And I spent a fair amount of time building a relationship when working with a guy named Jim Cook, who runs a business called Boston Beer Company, who I believe is he's the smartest person I've ever known. And I used to follow what he did. And that's how I learned to run a beer business. And one day I noticed that he had a bunch of female beer salespeople, and we had zero. And I called him and said, Jim, how do you do that? And he said, well, Alan, you don't have any because you're looking for the qualities that sell beer, and they're all men. It's a male-dominated field. If you want women, you have to start interviewing differently, look at different qualifications, look at different training. And he said, the first couple are really tough. To get a woman willing to come into this male-dominated world. The whole beer industry is male-dominated, which is the reason why female salespeople were very effective. And he was absolutely right. And so we started changing the way we looked at resumes. We looked at the way we started interviewing. We looked at the way we presented, the way we started making changes to the way we did some things. And when I left, we were at least 40% female sales team. Once we got 3, it became easier. The first one was too young not to know that this could be a problem, and it wasn't. She was great. The second one came in. She probably didn't pay attention. But by the third one, I noticed that women were taking us more seriously in that role because we started to build a female side to the sales department. And that only made our sales department far more effective, in my opinion.
So, Ellen, unfortunately, as usual, time goes by too fast, and we have to end it here. As usual, Alan and I tend to have these really wide-ranging conversations, and staying on one topic is just about impossible. So, if you're expecting to hear about retirement and reinvention, you heard a bunch about that, but you also heard a bunch about just normal. What did we learn over the last, my 73 years and Alan's, 78 years now?
No, 79. But who's counting? Josh, the whole concept that you're trying to do, again, you and I frequently disagree on this.
Yes.
To me, one of the things I learned early is I have life. I have a life. And, you kind of separate business from reinvention. To me, I don't.
Well, when you're in business, it's all one the same. Reinvention, this is just my sort of thought process around reinvention. It happens when you stop working. When many people stop working and they go off into the sunset thinking they're going to travel and play golf and have dinner parties, and 6 months, 4 months down the road, they're saying, what happened to my life? And those are the folks I'm talking about really for reinvention. You have been reinventing yourself for 45, 50 years, maybe longer.
Probably longer.
Yeah,
moving from New York to Vermont.
Yeah. So the truth is, for you, reinvention is more about transition. For the standard retiree, who we think about as a standard retiree, it's not transition because they're not even transitioning; they're stuck. And whether they're stuck is an ending. They have an ending that's happened, and they don't
Yep.
know how to move on. At least
Yep.
that's my experience of,
No, yeah.
Yes.
We frequently get to the same place in a different way, and I think
Yes,
we would probably do that with this conversation.
we would
could do
too.
this one for another hour.
Yeah, and unfortunately, we really are out of time, so we have to end it here.
That's okay.
So I'm going to say thank you for hanging out with us today. This is Josh Patrick. We're with Alan Newman. You're at The Long Strange Trip. Yay, Grateful Dead. And I hope to see you back here soon.